So my name is Gwinnett Hall. I am the Accessible Learning Technology Manager at the McBurney Disability Resource Center at UW-Madison. I'll give you a quick history of my work, I guess. I have over 25 years worth of experience in education. I was a classroom teacher and a special ed teacher for many years before moving into higher ed. And the past 6 years, I've worked here at the Disability Center at UW-Madison as the Accessible Learning Technology Manager, which means that I am in charge, or I oversee all of the furniture accommodations on campus, note-taking accommodations, and alternative formats. So all of the adaptive technology accommodations I oversee on campus. I have a undergraduate degree in education and a master's degree in special education, where I focused all of my research on brain development in regards to learning disabilities and autism. So that's really my specialty, learning disabilities and autism. So today we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to start with disability law, because disability law is different between K-12 and higher education. We're going to talk about university role, the parent role, and the student roles in accommodations in higher ed. We'll talk about general accommodation processes, and we'll also talk about adaptive technology accommodations. So what students might see in a higher ed education, higher ed accommodations. And then also preparing for college. We're going to talk about how to prepare students for college, and then also those tips for transitioning into college. So IDEA, which I know you all are very much familiar with, is disability law that works for K-12. So it protects the rights of children with disabilities. It expires after K-12. So after a student has graduated from K-12, they move out of that system, or they are 21 years of age. Services under IDEA are mandated by federal law and the U.S. Department of Education. So there are some federal fundings, but generally funding comes from your schools or local areas, or the local area around your school. These are mandated by law. So you have to provide services in K-12. They're mandatory. And schools are also mandated to provide all accommodations and evaluations. So they evaluate students as well. For the ADA law, which is the Americans with Disability Act, that is the rights that protect adult students with disabilities. This is a civil rights law, so it works a little differently than the ADA. It is really ensuring that adults with disabilities have equal access to their education, employment, transportation, public events and buildings, et cetera, along those lines. It is an extension of Section 504, and it is enforced by the Office of the Civil Rights Office. So it is, there's absolutely no federal funding that comes to us to provide these accommodations. Students must self-identify and apply for accommodations. So we do not go out and look for students. Students have to come to us and they have to request accommodations, and the accommodations must be reasonable. They also have to be reasonable in regards to cost. And then the student is also responsible to provide all of their documentation. And if a student does not have documentation, they are responsible to find and pay for that evaluation. So the best way to think of the difference between these two and how we kind of think of them here in higher ed is, the IDEA is all about success, right? Making sure that the student is successful in their education and in school. But here at higher ed, it is all about access. We do care about the success for the student, but we put things in place for access. So the role of the Disability Service Office in higher education is to determine reasonable accommodation. We do a combination of documentation review, and then we also do a self-report. So we listen to the student and we figure out, how what have they received before for accommodations, what has worked, what have they done before, and then we also look at that documentation to determine this. There are students who come to us without documentation, and that could be because of they don't have the resources for documentation. They didn't have the money to get documentation. Maybe their culture doesn't allow for them to have documentation and go through those steps to become identified with a disability. So in those cases, we do temporary accommodations until the student can be evaluated. And in that case, we use the self-evaluation to determine whether or not they have a disability for us to move forward with temporary accommodations, to then help them get in line and get those resources to be evaluated so we can have those documents. So it's not, you don't have to absolutely have documentation to receive accommodations, but it does help. It makes things go a lot faster, and then you're not waiting in line to get them. We serve as advocates for students. So we will not go out and speak for a student unless the student comes to us and asks us to become an advocate for them. So we help with students figure out the language to use to talk to their professors. We might help them draft an email. We might do role play to help them figure that out. And then sometimes we do lead the conversation. We get involved and we do kind of lead that conversation with a professor. But we do not step in without a student involved in that conversation. We provide accommodations. So we provide different disability services office will provide different accommodations. So here at our office, we do provide a lot of adaptive technology accommodations. We provide DHH accommodations like interpreting and CART, but what we do not provide is like testing accommodations. Testing accommodations are provided in a different area off campus that are actually through each department and through the instructors. However, in some other disability services office, testing is provided through the Disability Service Center. So everybody provides different types of accommodations. We also consult with instructors to provide accommodations. So we meet with instructors, we figure out what their content is, how they structure their course, and sometimes help them figure out a different way to assess or a different way to provide that content for that student. So it's equal access. We cannot change the way that a program is designed and the requirements for a program or the requirements for a class. We cannot change that. We can, however, come up with other options that are equal to those requirements that the instructor can then determine whether or not that is acceptable to use. And then we also serve as a resource. So we do connect students with other campus places on campus that are helpful, other resources on campus, even resources throughout the community we connect them to. So a student's responsibility is self-identifying. So a student has to self-identify with our office in order to receive accommodations. And then they have to register with the McBurney Disability Resource Center or any disability resource center there is. There is some type of application or process that a student has to go through, and every disability service office is different. They also are going to have to follow the request processes for accommodations. So just because they become affiliated with a disability service office, that doesn't mean that they are going to automatically just get accommodations. There's probably some type of process that they have to go through in order to get those accommodations. And they're all going to be different depending on how each disability service office is organized and runs, but they should be very clear in that process. And then the student is the person who really should be and is communicating with their instructor about their accommodations. They are the ones who are meeting with their instructors, talking about their accommodations, what they're qualified for, what they need. It generally is not coming from the Disability Service Center. However, we do help students learn how to do that self-advocacy and communicate, and then we also step in and help if there's any kind of problem or issue or concern on the student or the instructor's part to kind of resolve those issues. So the student and guardian role completely shifts in college. And this is one of the hardest things for parents to kind of understand as their child is moving into higher education. Due to FERPA laws, we cannot talk to anybody about any student that we are affiliated with. So if a parent calls our center and wants to know how their student is doing, we cannot disclose any kind of information, and we can't tell them anything about that student. And that becomes very frustrating. We do have a way around that, and it is not, it's an option. It's not the norm, but it is possible for students to fill out an ROI, which is a release of information form. And sometimes these students will fill out a release of information so their parents can contact us and get information. But even then, when a student has a release of information form and we have a parent who has, maybe they've contacted me because they're very concerned they haven't gotten their, accommodation for maybe their note-taking accommodation or something is not working for them, I will automatically email the student and say, hey, student, we have been your parent has been in contact with us and they've said that you're having difficulty with your note-taking accommodations. Do you want to set a time to meet and talk a little bit more about this? Or, do you want to email me back and let me know what's going on? So even if we have the ROI, we do automatically want to bring that student into the conversation because this is their education and they take the lead.